The Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis. This theory proposes that around 12,800 years ago, a swarm of fragments from a disintegrating comet slammed into the ice sheets covering North America and parts of Europe, unleashing a catastrophe severe enough to plunge the entire planet back into Ice Age conditions almost overnight. The idea traces back to a 2007 paper led by nuclear scientist Richard Firestone, who along with a team of researchers pointed to a strange, dark layer of sediment found at dozens of archaeological sites across the world, nicknamed the Black Mat. Inside that layer, researchers reported unusual concentrations of nanodiamonds, melted glass spherules, and elevated platinum levels, all of which are typically associated with extraterrestrial impacts rather than ordinary erosion or fire. What sets this theory apart from a simple Ice Age story is the suddenness it implies.
Instead of a slow climatic drift, the hypothesis describes an abrupt, violent event that could have wiped out the mammoths and other megafauna, ended the Clovis culture in North America almost overnight, and, according to more speculative interpretations, erased any trace of a more organized human society that might have existed at the time. This is precisely why the theory has captured so much public attention. Writers like Graham Hancock have leaned on it to argue that a sophisticated, seafaring culture was wiped from the historical record by this very event, and that the flood myths found in nearly every ancient culture on Earth are folk memories of that single global disaster.
Mainstream geologists remain divided, with many accepting that the Younger Dryas cooling event was real while questioning whether a comet impact was truly the cause. But the emotional pull of a forgotten world destroyed in an instant keeps the theory alive in documentaries, books, and late-night discussions year after year. The Silurian Hypothesis. This is not a fringe claim scribbled on an internet forum, but an actual thought experiment published in 2018 by NASA climate scientist Gavin Schmidt and astrophysicist Adam Frank in the peer-reviewed International Journal of Astrobiology. The two researchers were not trying to prove that an ancient civilization existed. Instead, they were asking a much stranger and more unsettling question, which was whether we would even be able to tell if one had. Their starting point came from the search for life on other planets.
If astronomers hope to detect the chemical fingerprints of alien civilizations on distant worlds, they first need to understand what evidence an industrial society leaves behind after tens of millions of years of geological churn, erosion, and continental drift. What makes this theory different from typical lost civilization claims is that it never asserts direct evidence has been found. Schmidt and Frank instead outlined what scientists should be looking for, such as unusual concentrations of certain isotopes, traces of synthetic chemicals or plastics compressed into rock layers, or unexplained shifts in the fossil record that hint at rapid industrial-level disruption to the planet's ecosystems. The reason this idea spreads so widely in public conversation is that it exposes something genuinely uncomfortable, which is how thin the boundary really is between the deep past being empty of intelligent life and simply being unrecorded.
A few million years is enough time for oceans to rise and fall, for continents to shift position, and for almost every trace of a city or a machine to be ground into dust and folded into the crust. The paper never claims a hidden industrial civilization existed before humans, but the very fact that credible scientists took the question seriously enough to publish on it is what gave the idea such staying power in the public imagination. The Legend of Atlantis. The story originates with the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who described it in two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE. In his account, Atlantis was a powerful island civilization located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, ruled by descendants of the sea god Poseidon, with concentric rings of water and land, advanced engineering, and a military so strong it nearly conquered ancient Athens before the gods punished its arrogance by sinking it beneath the waves in a single day and night. Plato claimed the story had been passed down from Egyptian priests to the Athenian statesman Solon roughly 200 years earlier, placing the supposed fall of Atlantis about 9,000 years before his own time. What sets this account apart from most ancient myths is its remarkable specificity. Plato does not simply gesture at a lost golden age. He describes canals, temples, harbor structures, and a detailed political history, giving the story a texture that later readers mistook for a genuine historical record rather than a philosophical allegory about pride and the fall of great powers. This specificity is exactly why the legend has endured for more than 2,000 years and why it matters so much to the modern fascination with lost civilizations. Explorers, occultists, and amateur researchers have proposed locations ranging from the Mediterranean and the Mid-Atlantic to the Caribbean and even Antarctica, each insisting they have found the true site. Most classical scholars and historians view Atlantis as a literary device Plato invented to illustrate a moral lesson about hubris. But the story became the template that nearly every later lost civilization theory would borrow from, which is precisely why it remains the most recognizable name in this entire genre. The Piri-Reis Map. Unlike the previous entries, this one is not a myth or a scientific paper, but a physical object you can look at today, housed in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. It was drawn in 1513 by Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri-Reis, who openly admitted in his own notes that he compiled it from a number of older source maps, some reportedly dating back to the era of Alexander the Great, most of which have since been lost to history. The map was rediscovered in 1929 by a museum director sorting through the palace archives, and it immediately drew attention for its unusually accurate depiction of the West African and South American coastlines at a time when European exploration of those regions was still in its infancy. What makes the map genuinely different from other entries on this list is a claim made decades later by American college professor Charles Hapgood in his 1966 book, who argued that a landmass drawn along the map's southern edge closely resembled the coastline of Antarctica as it would appear beneath the ice sheet, a landmass that would not be officially confirmed by modern seismic surveys until the 20th century. If true, this would imply the original source maps were created by a civilization capable of surveying the continent before it was buried under ice thousands of years ago.
This is why the map continues to circulate so widely in documentaries and online discussions, because it offers something tangible rather than speculative, a real historical artifact you can trace back through named cartographers rather than an oral legend. Mainstream cartographic historians push back on this interpretation, arguing the southern landmass is more likely a distorted or imaginative extension of the South American coast, a common feature in maps from that era. But the sheer physical reality of the document keeps the theory firmly alive. Göbekli Tepe. This is a hilltop site in southeastern Turkey, first noted by researchers in 1963, but not properly understood until German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating it in the 1990s, revealing massive T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in circular enclosures, many carved with detailed images of foxes, scorpions, snakes, and boars.
Radiocarbon dating placed the site at roughly 11,600 years old, which makes it older than Stonehenge by about 6,000 years, and older than the invention of writing, pottery, and even organized agriculture as archaeologists had previously understood the timeline. What makes this discovery different from the other entries here is that it is not speculation built on myth or maps, but hard physical evidence, excavated, dated, and studied by mainstream archaeology, and it directly contradicts the long-held assumption that only settled farming communities could organize the labor needed to build monumental architecture. The people who carved and raised these multi-ton pillars appear to have been hunter-gatherers, which forces a fundamental rethink of how early complex societies actually formed. This is why Göbekli Tepe matters so much to anyone interested in lost civilizations, because it proves that at least once in the deep past, human organizational capability leapt far ahead of what conventional timelines expected, quietly and without any myth to announce it beforehand. It raises an obvious and slightly unsettling question, which is if one such site could remain buried and unknown for 11,000 years until a chance discovery, how many other examples of unexpected sophistication might still be sitting undiscovered beneath the ground somewhere else in the world? The Sphinx water erosion theory. This theory came from geologist Robert Schoch, who examined the Great Sphinx of Giza in the early 1990s and argued that the deep, undulating grooves cut into its limestone enclosure walls looked nothing like the erosion patterns produced by thousands of years of desert wind and blowing sand. Instead, he concluded the pattern was consistent with prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall, the kind of weathering that would require a much wetter climate than Egypt has experienced since the end of the last ice age. Schoch presented his findings to the Geological Society of America in 1992, arguing that for this type of erosion to occur, the Sphinx and its surrounding enclosure would need to date back to somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 BCE. Thousands of years before the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, who conventional Egyptology credits with commissioning the monument around 2500 BCE. What sets this theory apart is that it does not rely on legend, translated texts, or symbolic interpretation, but on a direct geological reading of the stone itself, argued by a credentialed academic in front of his peers, rather than published only in popular books.
If accurate, it would mean an organized society with the capability to carve monumental stone structures existed in Egypt thousands of years earlier than any known dynasty, effectively erasing the accepted starting point of Egyptian civilization. This is why the theory carries so much weight in popular discussions of lost civilizations, further amplified by researchers like John Anthony West and later by Graham Hancock, who used it as supporting evidence for a broader, lost global culture. Mainstream Egyptologists and many geologists have pushed back firmly, pointing out that heavy rainfall periods in the region are difficult to date precisely and that other explanations for the erosion pattern remain plausible. But the debate has never been fully closed, which keeps the Sphinx standing at the center of one of archaeology's most persistent controversies.